The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension, as a young black girl walked in with her head held high. Her steps were careful, but determined, each one echoing against the polished floors as if announcing her presence to everyone who doubted her. At just 16, she had already faced more challenges than most people could imagine in a lifetime. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and prejudice was common, she had learned early that life would not be fair. She had seen the way people looked at her, whispered about her, and assumed she was weak or unworthy. But she also knew something very important. Her voice mattered, and she would not be silenced. Today, she was about to face the most intimidating situation of her life. A courtroom full of strangers, a stern judge, and adults who did not believe she could defend herself. The very walls seemed to close in, filled with whispers and glances that questioned her ability to stand her ground. Her family sat in the back, holding their breath, praying that she would find the courage to speak. They had always told her she was stronger than she realized, and now she would have to prove it. As she took her place in front of the judge, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The opposing side, a team of experienced lawyers, glanced at her with smirks, almost daring her to falter. The judge, a man known for his sharp tongue and harsh judgments, watched with curiosity, perhaps even amusement. He had seen many young people enter his courtroom, and most of them failed to impress him. Most people expected her to stumble, to shrink under the pressure, to remain silent while others spoke for her. But she had a plan. She had spent weeks preparing, memorizing every fact, every detail, and every argument that could help her. Even though she was young, she had intelligence, determination, and a heart full of courage. She remembered the words of her mother. People will try to put you down, but you can rise above them. And she repeated them silently to herself. Her father had also taught her that strength was not just physical. It was in thinking clearly, speaking confidently, and never letting fear control her actions. With each deep breath, she felt her fear transform into focus. She reminded herself that she did not need anyone's approval, and that her voice could change the course of this day. Around her, the room seemed almost hostile. Some people whispered insults under their breath, assuming she was unprepared. Others stared, curious to see if she would fail. Even the air seemed heavy, as if holding its breath along with the audience. But she kept her eyes forward, not allowing doubt to creep in. She scanned the courtroom, noticing small details, the papers on the lawyer's desk, the judge's gavel, the anxious expressions on the jury members' faces. Each observation gave her a sense of control, a small reminder that she was ready. This was more than a legal battle. It was a test of her resilience, her ability to stand tall when the world expected her to collapse. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated, teachers who ignored her ideas, classmates who laughed at her dreams, strangers who judged her by the color of her skin. Today, none of that mattered. Today, she had a chance to prove that courage, intelligence, and preparation could overcome prejudice. The moment she opened her mouth, the world would have to listen, even. As the judge cleared his throat, preparing to speak, she felt a calm determination settle in her chest. It was a strange feeling, almost like a shield, protecting her from fear. She had faced impossible odds before, and now she was ready to face them again. The room seemed to shrink around her as she prepared to begin. Every eye was on her. Every whisper faded into silence. She realized that this moment was not just about winning a case. It was about showing herself, and everyone watching that she could stand strong, no matter how impossible the challenge. Her mind was clear, her heart steady, and her voice waiting to break the silence. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. And as she took a final deep breath, she felt a spark of something powerful, something that told her she was exactly where she needed to be, ready to face whatever came next. This was the beginning of a story that no one in that courtroom would ever forget, and she knew it. The courtroom buzzed quietly as the young girl prepared herself for what was about to happen. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, some filled with doubt, some with curiosity, and others with a quiet anticipation that made her heart race. Across from her, The opposing lawyers exchanged confident glances, as if the outcome was already decided. Their whispers were sharp, mocking, and dismissive, and she could almost hear them thinking she didn't belong here. The judge, leaning back in his chair, appeared amused, glancing at her like she was just another child trying to act older than she was. The room felt colder somehow, the tension wrapping around her like an invisible chain. But she did not falter. She reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving, and those who underestimated her would soon realize their mistake. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down, yet it only strengthened her resolve. She remembered the long nights of preparation, the notes she had written, and the advice from her mentors who believed in her abilities. Those memories gave her courage. She could feel her pulse quicken as the first lawyer began to speak, his voice sharp and commanding. He painted a picture of her as weak, inexperienced, and unprepared, implying that she had no protection, no support, no hope. Laughter erupted quietly from some corners of the courtroom, not out of humor, but out of disbelief, as if the idea of her standing up for herself was absurd. The judge's lips curled into a small, mocking smile, and she felt the sting of humiliation. But instead of shrinking, she straightened her back, her eyes locking on the lawyer. Her mind raced, analyzing every word, every gesture, every slight against her. She knew that patience and timing would be her greatest weapons. Then came her moment. She stood slowly, letting the room notice her presence. And when she spoke, her voice was clear, calm, and surprisingly firm. "Your arguments are based on assumptions, not facts," she said, and a hush fell over the room. Some heads turned sharply, and even the opposing lawyers blinked, surprised by her confidence. She continued, carefully choosing each word, revealing contradictions and errors that even seasoned adults had overlooked. Piece by piece, she dismantled the narrative that had been built to belittle her. As she spoke, the murmurs of laughter began to fade, replaced by quiet gasps and whispers of shock. Even the judge's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of respect or perhaps uncertainty passing across his face. She was no longer just a young girl standing in a courtroom. She had become a force, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in, and then delivered an example that silenced the room completely. A simple fact, overlooked by everyone, that changed the perspective of what they thought they knew. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, the energy in the courtroom shifting from ridicule to tension. The lawyers, who had been so confident moments before, now exchanged hurried glances, realizing they might have underestimated her. She noticed their subtle panic, but did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the truth and the story she was telling. Each point she made was carefully crafted, a thread pulling the entire courtroom together, showing that what they thought was her weakness was actually her strength. Her calm demeanor in the face of mockery, her intelligence, and her courage created a ripple through the audience, changing the atmosphere entirely. The judge, once amused, now leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he listened carefully. The silence in the courtroom was almost deafening, broken only by her voice, steady and unwavering. For the first time, everyone realized that the girl they had laughed at might just be the one controlling the room. And in that quiet, charged moment, the seeds of respect were planted. The young girl knew she had captured their attention, and that was just the beginning of a battle she was determined to win. The courtroom had shifted from mockery to a tense silence, and the young girl could feel it like electricity in the air. The judge, once amused and distant, now watched her closely, his eyes sharp and calculating. He had expected a nervous stumble, a weak argument, something that would confirm his assumptions. But what he saw instead was confidence, clarity, and determination. The opposing lawyers, who had laughed at her mere presence, now whispered urgently among themselves, realizing that underestimating her had been a mistake. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by furrowed brows and subtle panic. Yet she remained calm, her mind focused like a laser. Every word she had memorized, every point she had rehearsed, now flowed effortlessly from her lips. She spoke of facts that were indisputable, weaving them into a story that even the most experienced adults could not ignore. She brought forward evidence that no one had considered, pointing out flaws in the opposing argument that were glaring once revealed. The audience leaned forward, intrigued, shocked, some even holding their breath as they followed her reasoning. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had slowed. Every eye in the room locked on her. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but his voice sounded unsure, betraying the first sign of respect mixed with disbelief. He had not expected this, and for the first time, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. She paused, letting the tension hang in the air, and then she shared a story, simple yet powerful, about her life and why she had been forced into this courtroom. Her words painted a picture of courage, struggle, and resilience that no one could deny. The spectators, some skeptical at first, now felt their hearts stir with empathy. Their previous amusement had vanished, replaced by awe and quiet admiration. One by one, whispers spread through the courtroom, and even the opposing lawyers shifted uneasily in their seats. The young girl sensed the change and smiled slightly, not out of arrogance, but out of recognition that the room was finally listening. She realized that courage was contagious, and by standing tall, she had begun to shift the balance. The judge leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the bench, betraying the first sign of doubt about his earlier assumptions. She could see it in his eyes, the realization that this young girl might be more capable, more prepared, and more intelligent than anyone had given her credit for. But she did not let herself be distracted by his reaction. Her focus remained sharp, her voice steady, as she presented the final piece of evidence, something that even the most confident lawyer could not refute. As she spoke, the room seemed to grow heavier, every word sinking into the minds of everyone present. The audience felt the weight of the truth, and for the first time, the laughter that had once filled the room seemed like a distant memory. She looked around, noticing the subtle gestures, the quick glance exchanged between lawyers, the slight narrowing of the judge's eyes, the shocked expressions of the spectators. It was all proof that her strategy was working, that she had turned what seemed impossible into a powerful statement of intelligence and courage. A small smile appeared on her lips, but she knew the battle was not yet over. The real test was the judge's final decision, and she had to continue speaking with precision, confidence, and grace. Every word mattered. Every gesture counted. She felt the energy of the courtroom shift further from doubt to uncertainty, and she knew she had already achieved something remarkable. She had made people listen, made them reconsider, made them feel the power of determination. For the first time in that room, the idea that she was defenseless seemed ridiculous, almost laughable. The young girl took a deep breath, feeling a surge of confidence. She had faced humiliation, doubt, and mockery, yet she stood taller than anyone had expected. In that moment, she understood that strength was not about age, size, or background, but about belief in oneself and the courage to act when it mattered most. And as she continued to speak, she knew that the next moments would change everything in that courtroom forever. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet, a tension that could almost be felt in the air. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the young girl, waiting, almost unwilling to blink. She had gone from being laughed at to being the center of attention. And now something remarkable was about to happen. The judge, who had been composed and slightly amused just minutes ago, now leaned forward, his expression unreadable but serious. He had clearly realized that this was no ordinary case, and no ordinary girl. The opposing lawyers whispered hurriedly among themselves, their confidence beginning to waver. They had underestimated her, and now they were scrambling to regain control. She noticed it all, but did not allow herself to be distracted. Her focus was on delivering the truth with clarity, courage, and precision. She began to speak again, her voice calm but commanding, presenting her argument in a way that left no room for doubt. She pointed out inconsistencies in the opposing side's claims, referencing details that only someone who had prepared carefully could know. The courtroom began to shift, murmurs of surprise and admiration rippling through the audience. Even the most skeptical spectators could not ignore the clarity of her reasoning. As she continued, she revealed a piece of evidence that no one had expected, something that changed the entire perspective of the case. A document, a testimony, or a fact so simple yet powerful. It made the arguments against her crumble in an instant, leaving the opposition speechless. The judge's hand hovered over his gavel, not ready to interrupt, because even he could see the strength of her words. The audience felt the weight of the moment, sensing that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. She paused for just a moment, allowing everyone to absorb the impact of what she had just said, and then, with a quiet determination, she told her story, not just as a girl in a courtroom, but as a human being who had faced injustice, prejudice, and doubt all her life. Her words painted a vivid picture of her struggles and triumphs, making the spectators feel the fear, the courage, and the resilience that had brought her here. The courtroom, once filled with whispers and laughter, now fell completely silent, a hush that seemed to stretch endlessly. The judge, the lawyers, the audience, everyone was holding their breath, listening intently. The young girl could feel the shift, a sense of power and control she had never experienced before. She realized that by standing tall and speaking the truth, she had changed the entire energy of the room. Every sarcastic glance, every smirk of disbelief had disappeared, replaced by shock, respect, and a quiet admiration. Even the opposing lawyers, who had once seemed untouchable, now looked uncertain and hesitant. She knew she had reached a turning point, but she could not stop yet. Her confidence surged as she realized that the moment was hers to seize. She continued, highlighting not just her evidence, but the principle at stake: justice, fairness, and the courage to stand against ridicule. Her words resonated with everyone present, the weight of her conviction impossible to ignore. The judge leaned back slightly, his face a mixture of respect and disbelief, clearly impressed by the intelligence, clarity, and courage of the young girl. For the first time, the idea that she had no protection seemed absurd, almost ridiculous. She had become a symbol of strength, proving that intelligence, preparation, and courage could overcome any prejudice. She could feel the room shifting beneath her words. Every spectator, every lawyer, even the judge, silently acknowledging that she was not just defending herself, but standing for something much greater. Her eyes met those of her family in the back, and she saw pride and amazement reflected in their faces. It was a moment that would stay with them forever. The young girl took a deep breath, ready to deliver the final part of her argument, knowing that she had captured the attention, respect, and perhaps even the admiration of everyone in the room. This was no longer just a courtroom battle. It was a story of courage, determination, and the power of standing tall against the impossible. And as she prepared to speak the next words, she could feel the entire courtroom waiting, silent and expectant, for the moment that would change everything. The courtroom was deathly silent now. Every sound amplified, every movement noticed. The young girl had done the impossible. She had captured the attention of everyone, from the murmuring spectators to the skeptical lawyers, and even the judge himself. He, who had laughed just moments ago, now sat forward, his eyes narrowing, his face betraying the first signs of true surprise and respect. The opposing lawyers exchanged nervous glances, their confident facade crumbling as they realized they were facing not a timid girl, but a formidable presence. She felt it too. The shift in energy, the undeniable sense that the impossible was now within reach. She could feel the power in her voice, the weight of every word she had spoken pressing on the room, and she knew she had their attention completely. Her arguments were precise, her facts unassailable, and her courage radiated through every gesture. Even the whispers of disbelief had vanished, replaced by a quiet tension that made the room feel almost sacred. She paused briefly, letting the silence settle, then continued, detailing her case with clarity and logic that left no room for doubt. She spoke not only with her mind but with her heart, telling the story of her life, her struggles, and her determination to be heard when so many had tried to silence her. The spectators leaned forward, captivated by her words, as if they were witnessing something historic. The lawyers, usually so composed, now fidgeted, their confidence shaken by the young girl's command of the room. The judge's pen hovered over his notes, and for the first time he seemed unsure of how to respond. He had underestimated her, and now the reality of her strength was impossible to ignore. She brought forth a final piece of evidence, simple yet powerful, that completely dismantled the opposing argument. It was a moment of revelation, as everyone realized that the truth had been clear all along, but only she had the courage to present it. The judge's mouth opened slightly, a sign that he was impressed, but he said nothing, allowing the weight of her words to speak for themselves. The spectators were frozen, some with eyes wide in disbelief, others with silent admiration. Even the opposing lawyers were momentarily speechless, unsure of how to respond. She felt a surge of confidence as she saw the impact of her words. The room had transformed from a place of mockery to a place of respect, a place where her courage shone brighter than anyone had expected. And then she spoke the words that would change everything, a statement not just of fact, but of principle. Her voice rang clear and steady. No one should be underestimated, and no one is without protection when they stand for the truth. The silence that followed was profound, a pause so heavy it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Every eye was on her, every heartbeat in the room synchronized with her courage. The judge finally cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair, a mix of respect and astonishment on his face. He could no longer hide the fact that he had misjudged her. The opposing lawyers began to shift uncomfortably, realizing that they had underestimated not just her knowledge, but her determination and presence. The young girl smiled slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of her victory in that moment. She had not just presented her case. She had proven herself, her strength, and her intelligence. And in doing so, she had turned the entire courtroom upside down. The spectators who had once doubted her now watched in awe, understanding that courage and preparation could defy even the most intimidating odds. Her family's eyes glistened with pride, tears threatening to spill as they saw the girl they had always believed in command the room with unwavering strength. She knew that this moment would be remembered, not just as a victory in a courtroom, but as proof that standing tall and speaking the truth could silence even the loudest laughter. And as she prepared to take her next step, she realized that the hardest part was already behind her. The impossible had been faced, and for the first time, the young girl could feel the weight of triumph settling over her like a cloak of quiet, undeniable power. The courtroom had transformed completely. What had begun as a place of doubt and ridicule was now filled with a tense, reverent silence. The young girl stood confidently, knowing that every eye was on her, and every person present was feeling the impact of her courage and intelligence. The judge, who had laughed at her mere presence moments ago, now looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and respect. He could no longer deny the clarity of her arguments, the precision of her evidence, and the strength of her character. The opposing lawyers, once smug and dismissive, shifted nervously, their confidence shattered. They whispered to each other in hurried tones, trying to find a way to respond, but the girl's calm authority made their attempts feel weak and unnecessary. She had not only presented the facts, she had told a story that could not be ignored or dismissed. Every word she spoke resonated in the room, echoing off the walls and into the hearts of everyone present. The spectators, who had laughed at her just moments ago, now sat in awe, their faces a mixture of shock and admiration. Some quietly whispered to each other, repeating her words, as if trying to comprehend how someone so young could command the room with such power. She moved carefully, each gesture deliberate, reinforcing the points she had made. Her presence alone seemed to demand attention and respect. The judge cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence, but his voice was softer, measured, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "I have listened carefully," he said, "and it is clear that this young girl has presented her case with remarkable clarity and courage." A hush fell over the courtroom, as if even the walls were holding their breath. The girl nodded slightly, acknowledging the judge's words, but not letting herself be distracted. Her focus remained sharp. Because she knew the moment required both patience and strategy. She then addressed the room, her voice steady. I stand here not just for myself, but for every person who's been told they are defenseless, that they cannot fight for what is right. The audience was silent, completely absorbed by her words. Many felt chills as they realized the depth of her courage. Her family, sitting in the back, held each other tightly, pride and relief shining in their eyes. They had always believed in her. And now the entire courtroom was witnessing the strength they had known all along. The opposing lawyers exchanged anxious glances, realizing they had underestimated not only her preparation, but her ability to command respect in the face of mockery. The judge leaned back slightly, his hand resting thoughtfully on his chin. His expression softened, as if he were learning a lesson in humility and fairness. The young girl continued, her words carrying both authority and empathy. She spoke of fairness, justice, and the courage required to stand up when everyone expects you to fail. Each sentence struck the room like a quiet but powerful force. The spectators were captivated, hanging on to every word. Unable to turn away, they felt the weight of her truth and the power of her resolve. Even the opposing lawyers seemed to struggle to maintain composure, as her words exposed weaknesses in their arguments they could not defend. The judge's gavel remained untouched, yet the room seemed to pause in anticipation, as if waiting for him to formally recognize what everyone already knew, that the young girl, once laughed at and underestimated, had not only defended herself, but had commanded respect from every person in that room. She looked around, meeting the eyes of the spectators, the lawyers, and finally the judge, her gaze steady, unwavering. She knew that her message had reached them all, that courage, preparation, and the refusal to be silenced could overcome mockery, doubt, and prejudice. A wave of quiet admiration swept through the courtroom, replacing the laughter and whispers of doubt. And in that moment, she felt the triumph of standing tall, of being heard, of transforming a room that had mocked her into a room that acknowledged her strength. It was more than a victory in a case. It was a declaration of resilience, determination, and the undeniable power of believing in oneself. The moment the judge finally leaned back, signaling the end of the hearing, the courtroom remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Everyone in the room was processing what had just happened. The young girl had stood her ground, dismantled every argument against her, and shown a courage that few had anticipated. The opposing lawyers, who had arrived confident and composed, now looked stunned, their mouths slightly open as they tried to regain composure. Some shifted nervously in their seats, whispering hurriedly to each other, realizing that the battle they thought was theirs had been lost without a single objection. The judge, still absorbing the turn of events, adjusted his glasses and regarded her with a newfound respect. His earlier amusement had vanished completely, replaced by the weight of acknowledgement. It was clear that he had misjudged her abilities and her resolve. The spectators, meanwhile, were whispering in awe, exchanging glances as if confirming that what they had witnessed was real. The laughter and skepticism that had filled the room before were completely gone, replaced by admiration and quiet amazement. The young girl looked around calmly, her breathing steady, a small smile on her lips. She had expected the reactions, perhaps even hoped for them, but seeing the full effect was more powerful than she had imagined. Her family in the back rows were on their feet, clapping quietly at first. Then, with growing intensity, their pride and relief were palpable, as if her victory in the courtroom was a victory for all of them. She felt their support, and it strengthened her further. She had not only defended herself, but had also proven a lesson that extended far beyond the legal arguments. That courage, intelligence, and preparation could overturn even the most impossible situations. The opposing lawyers finally spoke, their voices subdued and cautious, offering polite acknowledgement of her arguments. Even they could not deny the clarity, insight, and courage she had shown. The judge cleared his throat, speaking with a tone that commanded attention. This young lady has demonstrated extraordinary clarity, intelligence, and courage today, he said, pausing to let the words sink in. Her arguments are sound, and her courage is undeniable. The courtroom erupted softly in approval, not in chaos, but in a collective recognition of her achievement. The young girl nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without arrogance. Her confidence was quiet but undeniable. She had proven that standing firm and speaking the truth could change minds and hearts beyond the courtroom. The lesson was even more powerful. Her story, once dismissed as trivial or impossible, had now become a testament to resilience, strength, and belief in oneself. The spectators began approaching her quietly, some offering words of encouragement, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief at the power she had displayed. Her family hugged her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. They whispered words of love, pride, and amazement, telling her how much they had always believed in her. She realized that this moment, this triumph, was more than just a legal victory. It was a declaration that no one should ever be underestimated, that courage could defy prejudice, and that preparation and intelligence could overcome mockery and doubt. The young girl felt a sense of calm settle over her. Knowing she had given her best, she had faced fear, ridicule, and skepticism, yet she had emerged victorious. Her story would stay with everyone in that room forever, a quiet but powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit. The judge, the lawyers, and the audience all had been witnesses to something extraordinary, something they would not forget. And as she gathered her things to leave the courtroom, the whispers of admiration followed her, a recognition that she had changed the narrative completely. She had turned a courtroom that once doubted her into a room full of respect and acknowledgement. And in that, she had discovered something even greater than victory. She had discovered the undeniable power of courage, resilience, and self-belief. The courtroom was quiet now, but the silence was different, no longer tense, no longer filled with doubt or disbelief. It was a silence of respect, of awe, of realization. The young girl stood tall, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the moments that had passed. Yet she felt a calmness settle over her, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had given everything. The spectators began to slowly rise, some clapping quietly, others whispering among themselves, acknowledging the courage and intelligence that had just been displayed. Even the opposing lawyers offered small nods, their earlier confidence replaced by genuine admiration. The judge, once laughing and dismissive, now regarded her with solemn respect. His eyes softened, and he seemed to understand that what he had witnessed was more than a courtroom argument. It was a lesson in courage and humanity. The young girl looked at him, and for a moment, she felt that the power of truth and resilience had bridged the gap between them. She turned her gaze to her family, who were smiling and teary-eyed. Their pride was overwhelming, but so was the sense of relief that justice, fairness, and courage had triumphed. She realized that this moment was bigger than herself, bigger than a courtroom. It was proof that one voice, one person, could make a difference, could challenge assumptions, and could inspire change. As she left the courtroom, whispers followed her, people repeating her words, recalling her courage, remembering the way she had stood tall when everyone expected her to fall. Outside, the sunlight felt different, warmer, as if the world itself acknowledged her victory. She thought about everything she had faced, the fear, the ridicule, the doubt that had tried to shake her, and she realized she had grown stronger because of it. The journey had been hard, but it prepared her for this moment, and for every moment that would follow. She knew that life would continue to challenge her, that people would still underestimate her, but she also knew that she now carried something no one could take away. Her own unshakable confidence. Her story would not end here. It would echo in the minds of everyone who had been in that courtroom, reminding them that courage could defy expectation, that strength could be quiet but undeniable. She thought about the other young people who might face similar situations, those who had been told they were defenseless or powerless, and she felt a responsibility to be an example, to show that intelligence, preparation, and belief in oneself could turn the impossible into reality. She remembered the words she had repeated to herself before stepping into the courtroom. Courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. and she now understood fully what they meant. Her voice had silenced laughter. Her logic had challenged authority, and her presence had commanded respect. She had taken what seemed like an impossible situation and transformed it into a story of triumph. The judge finally spoke again, his voice calm and measured. "This young girl has shown us all a lesson we will not forget," he said, and the weight of his words sank into the room. The young girl nodded slightly, acknowledging him, but also knowing that her victory belonged to herself and to everyone who had ever been underestimated. As she walked out of the courtroom, heads turned, whispers followed, and respect lingered in the air. She had become more than a girl in a courtroom. She had become a symbol of courage, determination, and resilience. And in that moment, she understood that no challenge was too great, no doubt too heavy, and no obstacle too powerful. When a person believed in themselves and stood firm, even the loudest laughter could be silenced. The sun shone on her face as she stepped outside, feeling free, powerful, and unstoppable. She had faced the impossible and won, not just with facts or arguments, but with courage, truth, and an unshakable belief in herself. And though the courtroom would return to its normal routines, the memory of that day, the silence that had followed her triumph, would live on forever, inspiring everyone who heard it to stand tall, speak their truth, and never let anyone convince them that they were defenseless